This question comes from Linda Frazier in Westport, Connecticut. Dear Mr. Buffett, in the past you've specified that 90% of your wife's inheritance be invested in a low-cost S&P 500 index fund and 10% in short-term government bonds. But the market cap of the Magnificent Seven tech stocks now represents more than 1/4 of the market cap weighted S&P 500 index, which seems like a big bet on the tech sector. I was wondering if you would now recommend investing some portion of the funds in a low-cost, equal-weight S&P 500 index fund rather than having all of the equities exposure in a tech-heavy market cap-weighted fund.
Well, that's an interesting question, and I will tell you that I revise my will about every 3 years or so, and I get little thoughts from time to time, and then you don't change it every time you do it. You get a tiny thing, but the one section I haven't changed is that with my wife, that she got left a huge amount of money by practically anybody's measurement except a pittance compared to what I've accumulated in total. And it won't make one bit of difference to her in life, whether she beats the S&P or anything else. All I want to leave is plenty of money to take care of way beyond anything she'll ever spend, and at the same time give her as much peace of mind as possible, and really make it so that the trustee who administers it doesn't have to worry about whether it just doesn't make any difference whether she beats the S&P or not. And the main thing is that she feels that she's in a financial position, which of course she will be, that she doesn't even need to think about it, and the trustee doesn't have to worry about getting sued or anything else. So it's simply not an economic condition. Now, obviously, with 99% plus of what I have going to philanthropy, and I've got my 3 children. The one good thing is that they've, at the age of 70, 69, and 65, they have matured remarkably, probably more than their father, and but at the same time, they've got less time to work with the money than they would if they were 50 or something like that. So you do the best in accomplishing your objectives in your will, and in the end, you don't know what's going to happen after you die, but you make sure that to the extent that you have a lot of money to leave, you want to say thanks to a lot of people, and quite a few people in terms of specific requests. You want to take care of your family, but in my case, that requires practically no money and a fair amount for taxes, but and my children are in charge of what happens to the funds that are left. But like I say, the problem is when you live as long as I have and your kids get older, who knows what happens with mortality tables, and they're the ones that I really want to see handle the distributions, and they will, and they'll be very good about it. But if we're all alive 3 years from now, they'll be 3 years older, and so everything, you can't solve everything in life. You do the best you can with it, and people do interesting things. I've been around probably as many rich people as almost anybody, and a fair number of them I know what they're doing or have done with their funds. And the idea that you can have a huge amount of money and leave everybody very rich and have people liking each other less when it all happens humans are really they are interesting to watch. Some of them handle it beautifully, and others are terrible. The one thing lawyers will always tell you is don't don't use codicils. In other words, when you change your mind on a will, just write a new one, but tear up the old one. Don't do it by just adding codicils. But I believe I'm correct. Certainly read it, that Paul Getty, who was the richest man in the world, presumably, at one point in the 1950s or 60s, and it's a very interesting guy to read about. And he had five wives, and he's the one whose grandson was kidnapped, and they sent Paul Getty an ear of the child and everything. I mean, it's not a happy life when you get through it. But the one thing he did that was kind of interesting, he actually liked to use codicils because I think he had like 25 of them, and it was kind of his way of writing, well, I'm taking you out of the will because, and so he sort of delighted in explaining through his will how he felt about all these people. I mean, you really get some strange things revealed in a will. I just read about a will of a fellow that made a whole lot of money and was leaving it to his, I don't know whether his children, grandchildren, whatever it may have been, but in any event, his opening line in his will is, and this was done some years ago, but I know something about the family. His opening line, in effect, said, I'm writing this will while I'm writing in the economy section of Eastern Airlines number such and such. I mean, he believed in getting right to the point of what the people who were recipients, how they should live, and he was going to be judging them. And it's just so damned interesting to watch people's wills. But one guy left a lot of money to his wife on the condition that she remarry so that at least one man would mourn his passing. Well, I'm not giving legal advice here, as they always say, but I feel very, very, very good about how things have turned out, and I wish I could figure out ways better to use, the really vast resources I've got in some of the really important questions of the world, but I haven't been able to do that. I mean, I had a few goals when I was 30 or 40 and may have written them in the wills then in terms of what the world needed done and how the money could be used. And unfortunately, I decided that they weren't feasible to accomplish. And of course, I was setting out to accomplish things that were important, but nobody had solved yet. So you got to expect that. Why should I be able to solve them? But nevertheless, it's an interesting. And the one thing about it is everybody here, I don't know about the ones who've come from other countries, but you should have a will. Because if you don't have a will, you still have a will. And it'll be whatever the state says. And it's amazing. 4 American presidents died intestate without wills. 4. We've only had 45. And imagine becoming president of the United States and not having a will. But you can look up somebody recent. I think Lincoln. I'm certain Lincoln was one of the 4. And here's a man. I mean, I don't know what you can always say. Well, he didn't get around to it, but that's hard to imagine that why Abraham Lincoln would have died intestate. I'm sure we've got some Lincoln scholars out there that will write me after this and explain why. But I'll be interested to receive their letters. But human beings are human beings, and we all have weaknesses and peculiarities and everything else. And don't be too hard on yourself because you have some of those. but don't be totally forgiving either. You can change the future. You can't change the past, but you can't change the future.
This question comes from Devin Spurgeon. On March 4th, Charlie's will was filed with the County of Los Angeles. The first codicil contained an unusual provision. It reads, "Averaged out, my long life has been a favored one, made better by duty imposed by family tradition, requiring righteousness and service. Therefore, I follow an old practice that I wish was more common now, inserting an ethical bequest that gives priority not to property, but to transmission of duty. If you were to make an ethical bequest to Berkshire shareholders, what duties would you impose and why?"
I'd probably say read Charlie. I mean, he's expressed it well. And, well, I would say that if they're not financially well off, if you're being kind, you're doing something that most of the rich people don't do even when they give away money. But that's not a question of whether you're rich or poor. And I would say if you're lucky in life, make sure a bunch of other people are lucky too. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Just in case you know what my advice to myself has been during this period.
I'm Marvin Blum from Fort Worth, Texas, the home to 4 of your companies.
Absolutely. We love Fort Worth.
Thank you. We love you too and your presence in our community. I'm an estate planning lawyer, and it's interesting as we wrap up today to ponder that the baby boomer generation is about to pass along the greatest transfer of wealth in history. I can design plans that eliminate estate tax and pass down great amounts of wealth to the next generation. But many of my clients come to me and say they want a plan like Warren Buffett's, leaving their kids enough so they can do anything, but not so much that they can do nothing. Now they ask me, and I'm asking you, how much is that? And how do you keep from ruining your kids?
Yeah. Well, I think more kids are ruined by the behavior of their parents than by the amount of the inheritance. That your children are learning about the world through you, and more through your actions than through your words. You know, from the moment they're born, you're their natural teacher, and you know it's a very important and serious job. And I don't actually think that the amount of money that a rich person leaves to their children is the determining factor at all in terms of how those children turn out. But I think that the atmosphere and what they see about them and how their parents behave is enormously important. I would say this: I've loosened up a little bit as I go along. Every time I rewrite my will, my kids are happy because they know I'm not reducing the amount anyway. And I do something else that I find that, which I think is an obvious thing, but it's amazing to me how many people don't do it. I think that your children are going to read the will someday. That's assuming you're a wealthy person. Your children are going to read the will someday. It's crazy to have them read it after you're dead for the first time. I mean, you're not in a position to answer questions then unless the Ouija board really works or something of the sort. And so if they're going to have questions about how to carry out your wishes or why you did this or that, why leave them endlessly wondering after you die? So in my own case, I always have my children, I rewrite a will every 5 or 6 years or something like that. And I have them read it. They're the executors under it. They should understand how to carry out their obligations that are embodied in the will. And they should also, if they feel there's anything unfair about it, they should express themselves before I sign that will, and we should talk it over, and we should figure out whether they're right or I'm right or someplace in between. So I think it's very important in wealthy families. Once the kids are of a certain age, I mean, I don't advise doing this with your 14-year-old or something, but when they get, certainly by the time they're in the mid-30s or thereabouts, I think they should be participants in the will. And I do think that if you get to be very wealthy, that the idea of trying to pass on, create a dynasty of sorts, it just sort of runs against the grain as far as I'm concerned. And the money has far more utility. The last hundreds of millions or billions have far more utility to society than they would have to create a situation where your kids don't have to do anything in life except call a trust officer once a year and tell them how much money they want. Charlie?
I don't think I want to go into this one.
Okay.
And I'm absolutely sure you don't want to discuss your will with your children if you're going to treat them unequally.
No.
That is poison.
But one of the problems you have, and what you want to discuss just for that very situation is there may be circumstances where one child will have much more of an interest in one type of asset than another or something of the sort. And if you want to make sure that your definition of equality in terms of handling different kinds of assets meshes or at least is understood by the children, so that they don't think the fact that you gave one a farm and another a house or something of the sort resulted in inequality when you thought it was equality. Charlie, you got anything?
No,
he's staying away from this one.
A few moments later.
I'm Marvin Blum, an estate planning lawyer from Fort Worth, Texas, home to many of your companies. In fact, Warren, I met you at the memorial for our beloved Paul Andrews, who was manager of TTI. I'd like to get your thoughts on a widespread problem in the world of estate planning, and that's the failure of most parents to prepare the next generation for the inheritance coming their way. In particular, if the estate includes a family business, most parents fail to do business succession planning to plan for who'll run the business on the day when, not if, the founder is no longer there to run it. The kids aren't prepared, unlike King Charles, the other King Charles, not King Charlie Munger, who has been preparing for his job as King of England now for more than 70 years. I sometimes describe the situation like this. Picture a football game. At one end of the field is a quarterback. He has great skills. He throws a beautiful pass to the other end of the field. And at the other end of the field are the receivers. They've never been to a practice. They don't know the rules of the game. They don't know how to work together as a team. They're clueless. So the quarterback is the patriarch and the matriarch. The football is the inheritance or the family business, and the receivers are the kids. So what are the odds that they're going to catch the football and go score a touchdown?
Yeah.
Probably only around 10%.
I've got the picture on just give me. Now, I probably observed as many, just because of my age and to some extent because of things like the giving pledges. I probably observed as many, particularly wealthy families, the problems, and they all get very particular to the family. And in my family, I do not sign a will until my 3 children have read it, understand it, and made suggestions. Now, my children are in their 60s, and that would not have been a great success if I'd done the same thing at their 20s. It depends on the family. It depends on how the kids feel about each other. There's all kinds of things. Depends on the kind of business you have. So there's 1,000 variables. But I do think that if the children are grown, and when the will is read to them, it's the first they've heard about what the deceased thought about things, the parents have made a terrible mistake. And people Well, I've run into all kinds of situations, and some people don't tell their children anything, and some of them try and get them to bend to their will by using their own personal will. They make a million mistakes, and that's one you don't get to correct. Now, certainly Charlie's had a lot of experience too with.
Well, at Berkshire, we have a simple problem of estate planning. Just hold the goddamn stock.
Well, but that doesn't fit everybody, Charlie. I mean,
No, it only fits 95%.
I don't think it necessarily. I don't know necessarily whether if you have billions of dollars, you want to leave it to all your children. I mean, that's something.
Well, that's another question. But if you're going to place it somewhere, I just as soon as Berkshire stock.
Yeah. Oh, you're solving the investment problem for them,
Yes,
but you've got
yes.
the personal problem of the fact that when they were 4, one of the kids pulled the other kid's cat's tail or something like that. I mean, you're dealing with human beings, and the biggest thing you want is you want your children to get along. I mean, you want that all through your life.
Yeah.
And the estate isn't the only place where you can mess that up, but it's a place where it's a very easy. I mean, I know a number of cases where the people did not know what was in the will, where there were huge sums involved, and within about 15 minutes, each one of them had a lawyer, and they don't get along since. I mean, it's important to handle it right, and it's important if you want your kids to have a certain values. It's important that you live those values. It's important that you talk about it to them, or they're learning from you from the day they're born what you're really like, and don't think that a cleverly drawn will substitute for your own behavior in teaching your kids the values you hope that they will have, and then your will should be in conjunction with that. It should start expressing it, and they grow older, and then they learn to pass along their values in connection with the size of the state. If there's family farms, it's one thing. If it's a bunch of marketable securities, it's something else. But I know of one instance by a particularly rich fellow that once a year he'd get his kids together and have a dinner and do all kinds of things to get them to sign their income tax returns in blank, because he didn't want them to know how much money they had and everything. Well, if that isn't going to work, I mean, I don't know what necessarily would have worked with him, but if you want, but Charlie and I have said it, if you want to figure out how you want to live your life, you write your obituary and reverse engineer it. I mean, and Paul Andrews, incidentally, who you mentioned, at TTI, lived as great a life as anybody I've known, and he thought about these problems, and he came to me. He was 61, I think, had all the money way beyond what he needed. Didn't care about. He'd like to give it to people. He had all kinds of good things he wanted to do, and he said, "For a year, I've been worried about my business, TTI." And he said, "I've got all the money I need. The family's got all the money that I need. But what do I do with the business? These people have helped me throughout my life." And he says, "I could sell it to a competitor. If I sold it to a competitor, they'd fire my people and keep their people when they put it together. And if I sell it to a private equity firm or somebody, they'll be figuring their exit strategy as they sign the papers." And he said, "I've been thinking about it a year." And he said, "It isn't that you're such a great guy." He says, "It's just you're the only one left." And we bought it, and we lived happily ever after. And that was a man that knew what life was about.